this is a self-portrait of him as a very young, emerging traditional dancer. And the elders would make fun of him because he was out there so young, and they were elders. And most of the young people didn't want to take the time to learn all of the background that goes with being a traditional dancer. And he was adamant about it, much as he was about everything else in his life, that he was going to do it and he was going to do it right. But when he first started, he felt very ephemeral and very shy and very scared to get out there with those older men whom he revered. And then little by little, as his confidence grew, he felt that he could honor them in his own way with his own dancing. And he danced even when he was dragging an oxygen tank around with him. He refused to give it up because it was that important to him. This is called Hand Games, and it's part of his father's heritage. His father was Omaha, and I don't exactly understand what the hand games are, and I don't pretend to, but they were done in ceremonies and in rituals and in namings. And so he painted this to honor his father's side of his heritage. I don't know where it is, actually. This was one that he did, about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe. He started working in watercolors, and his work started getting darker, and he had just come through a 1.5 years of spinal meningitis, which almost carried him away. And after traditional medicine had given up on him, and they told me, that's it, we have no more medicine we can give him, we called a medicine man, and he came out to the farm through the snow and did a ceremony for Bobby, and immediately he was cured of the spinal meningitis. And we took him back to the traditional doctors who had given him up for dead, and they took a spinal tap and they couldn't find any meningitis in there. So they said, well, this test must be wrong. We'll have to take another test. And so they took 3 more tests, and the spinal meningitis had completely disappeared. So thank you, Arvil Looking Horse, for coming to the farm. This is an oil painting that is in the collection of Dr. Clement, who used to run the business school and who now lives in Rapid City. It was from a portrait I took out on the Rosebud at a powwow, and after 3 days of dancing and heat and dust, the whole powwow grounds were just filled with dust. And when the sun was going down, they had put the staff of the Rosebud, and I was able to come up and take a photo of the setting sun through the feathers and through the dust. And he loved that photo so much that he really tried to make this painting adhere to the photo, which is something he didn't ordinarily do. He just used them like sketches. But in this case, the photo and this painting look almost identical. It's about 2 by 4 feet. It's called Eagle Staff. This is a piece that I was privileged to watch over a period of time. John Hagen owns it, and it's about 2 by 4 feet. He had done yet another of his pipe carriers with the Oscar House skull, and he was really bored with it, and it was about the millionth one he'd done, and it just sat in the studio for months, and he was getting ready to paint over it, as he often did. And then late one night, he just got up and ran in the studio and mixed about 15 colors of red, and literally attacked this canvas with some kind of fury, and painted all of his blankets red. And then he painted that shadow form behind him. And then he just after a while, he just threw away the brushes because they weren't going fast enough, and he was just putting the paint on with his hands. And then he painted an eagle flying past behind the pipe carrier. And I think it's one of the best pieces I've ever seen. I mean, he was very upset, he was very ill, and instead of just moaning and groaning over it, he made this instead. And that's what he often did as his illness progressed, is he would put what he felt onto the canvas. And as I told the kids last week, it's one of the things that separates true artists. They are not so concerned about making pretty pictures. They're concerned about portraying their soul. And this is definitely one of those pieces. It's called Feather. Now we go back in time. This is one of the first pieces he ever did. Dr. Howe would have them do these very quick, off-the-cuff pieces. He told me he called this one his 15-minute painting, because after 15 minutes were over, Dr. Howe would make them stop. That was it. You're finished now, to get them not to overwork things. This is in the collection of the Department of the Interior, and it's out at the Sioux Indian Museum in Rapid City. It's about 3 by 3 feet, and it's called Teepee. And I think it's one of his best pieces. It shows that innate talent that he brought with him. And he would just, for one thing, he told me that he was afraid to come out of his studio because he was so shy. And so he would spend a lot of hours, even overnight, in his studio painting when he first came to USD, because he was out of his culture. And unless Dr. Howe was around, sometimes he really felt out of his culture. So he would just stay in there and do things like this all night long. This is a piece that no longer exists in this form. He got a hold of some wonderful Belgian linen, nubbly raw linen, and he loved it. And so he painted these 3 figures on the linen, and then he just gestured the breastplates and the jewelry and called it done. And he sold it. And years later, the person who bought it came back and said, I want you to finish the painting. So because we needed the money, he went ahead and put dance shirts and chokers and breastplates and jewelry and everything that you could possibly want in an Indian painting on here. And so now it no longer exists in this form. The person who owns it is very happy with it that way. But I was very happy with it this way. Oh, now what is that? This is a piece that he did in response to a request from St. Joseph's Indian School in 1992, I believe. They were having a memorial for the massacre at Wounded Knee, and they asked several Indian artists to paint a painting depicting the theme of the massacre at Wounded Knee, but without, please, using any negative themes. And so they all scratched their heads and didn't know what to do for quite a while. I know Roger Brower had a real problem with it, because there actually aren't any other themes. But Bobby was able to go back to the ghost dance and go back to the hope that the tribe had, that through spiritual practices and through purity, they would be able to save their culture and save their people. In fact, it was one of his ancestors that went down and studied with the originator of the ghost dance and brought it back to the Lakota tribe. And so this painting meant a lot to him for that reason, that he decided to paint the spirit of the people as they went into the massacre rather than the way they came out of it. This is called Ieska, and it exists in many versions. It is a mixed blood man, and always when he would paint one of these, he would direct a beam of light through the eye so that you could see that it was blue, because he always felt that even though he had a very hard time as a full blood, that mixed blood people had twice as hard a time, because they'd have their foot in one culture and they'd have their other foot in the other culture, and whichever culture they were in, they were rejected because they were half the other culture. And so this theme came up over and over in his work as he empathized with those people. This is one of his last pieces, and again his messenger bird appears in it, the messenger from the other side. And at this point, the warrior has decided to embrace the bird rather than fighting anymore. It existed in another form for a long time. It had a red background. It was much lighter. And then once again, he went in one night when he was really sick and just attacked the background. And this is the form it exists in now. This is called Ten Crow, and it's in Judge Pearsall's chambers at the Federal Building in Sioux Falls. It's actually 2 panels. I believe they're 1 by 6 each. And he went back and back and back to this theme of the blackbird and the crow and the raven, and they appear over and over in his work. He always felt that they spoke to him. And I believe they did. This is a piece that's owned by the Oscar Howe Art Center in Mitchell, and it's just called Shield. It's a 24 by 30-inch watercolor, and it has his signature on it in green up there on the shield. Again, the same flat bird from the street, only now he's been rejuvenated and covered with trade cloth, and there are medicine bags and prayer things hanging off of him because it's a warrior's shield. It's a beautiful piece. If you look closely, you can see the warriors racing by behind the shield. He had painted the warriors in great detail, kind of like how Donnie Motlow does, and the background was all white, and I thought it was done. And then I came home from town one day, and he had put black paint over all of it, and at first I was really upset because I really liked the way they looked before. But as I looked at it, you know, he always had that incredible innate sense of exactly what to do. The warriors are there, but they're night warriors, and they're not supposed to be seen. I gave him a set of pastels for Christmas one year. And he said, well, I've never worked with pastels. I don't really know what to do. So I got him some pastel paper, and he went in the studio, and he fooled around for about 15 minutes, and he came up with this. And he said, is this right? I said, yeah, it's fine. He went on to do a lot of other pastels that are absolutely brilliant. But again, he knew when to stop. He didn't ever want to fill up. He said, this is not paint by numbers. I don't have to fill up every single area with something. This is called Waiting for the Drum, and it's a self-portrait, as any of you who knew him in his later years can see. It symbolizes his need to return to his roots, and yet feeling that because he had lived with the dominant culture for so many years, he was no longer at home there. And so instead of sitting with the drummers, he's just sitting at an empty powwow site, sitting with the drum and remembering when he was young. Excuse me, I'm taping this for myself.